bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Varandas, also known as Ricky Varandas for my American fans. And today we got a great show. Pat Miletich, UFC legend, MMA legend, and Jeffery Wilson, who are both hosts of the Conspiracy Farm podcast. It's a podcast that I ran into not too long ago. I ran into their podcast. I'm not sure what I was looking up or what I was searching. I was probably going down some rabbit hole and found some podcast called the Conspiracy Podcast. It caught my eye and I started listening to it, and didn't even hit me that Pat Miletich, who they're referring to as one of the hosts of the show, was the same Pat Miletich I was familiar with already as the UFC MMA legend. So it was really cool to find out that somebody I was already a fan of. I also had a lot of similar interests and parallel just opinions on stuff. So that was really cool. If you guys aren't familiar with the Conspiracy Farm, please check it out anywhere you can get podcasts. I'm sure you can find the Conspiracy Farm. If you're listening to this, then chances are whatever platform you're using, you can also find the Conspiracy Farm. We talk about everything and anything, like most Ripple Effect podcast episodes. Probably going to have some angry MMA fans and UFC fans, and probably some of my close friends who knew that I was having Pat Miletich on and are going to be a little angry that we don't talk more about MMA and UFC. But I'll have Jeffery Wilson and Pat Miletich on again in the near future to do that. We'll talk more MMA and maybe get some old stories that I'm sure Pat Miletich definitely has from the heydays of MMA when it was still up and coming and isn't the empire that is today. And remember to share this episode or any episode that you find interesting, like I talk about on this show, and I've told you guys numerous of times before that we can all do our part just by doing that. Share the show on any social media site that you use, anywhere. I mean, tell people about it. Word of mouth works too, and it just helps with just getting the information out there. You never know who is listening, who it's going to affect, and who you're touching just doing that. So we can all do our part in spreading this information. And similar with Pat, who's a very successful coach. He trains MMA guys like Robbie Lawler and Tim Sylvia and so many guys who are champs, and does a bunch of stuff. He's actually into a bunch of other businesses like hemp oil and training police officers and all that stuff. But yet he still does this podcast. And same thing with Jeffery Wilson. He has his hands in a lot of different stuff. And yet they both find this Conspiracy Farm podcast important because the topics that they're talking about and the things that they're talking about are important, just conversations to share. And if you also think they're important, then do the same, share them. And that's it. On our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6 is the name of the YouTube channel, or you can just search Ripple Effect Podcast. You can go on there, subscribe, and give us some thumbs up to some of our episodes and subscribe. And in the show notes there, you can always find links to all our guests' work. So it's a great way just to get connected with the guest and find links to their websites or their social media or whatever. So do that, and remember to rate the shows and all that stuff. It helps with, I think, people just searching and our show coming up and being recommended on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you're listening to this show. So do that to my show, to Conspiracy Farm, and any other podcast that you like and you think is talking about these important topics. So like I said, we talk about everything and anything from current events, history, personal philosophy, the future, typical Ripple Effect podcast. We're all over the place. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversation, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
I believe in the Ripple Effect.
one thing I love about your podcast is that you really focus on things that are provable, things that are historic events, and that type of stuff, which I think is really interesting. Because, you know, I've had Sam Tripoli on, who started a podcast not too long ago called the Tinfoil Hat Podcast. I've had Eddie Bravo, Eddie Bravo on, and we talked MMA and conspiracies for a long time, and
Eddie's gone off the edge. Yeah, not the edge of the flat Earth, but gone off the edge.
Yeah, he definitely.
Eddie's gone pretty deep. I'm trying to hang on a little more.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think Flat Earth is probably outside of Flat Earth. I think a lot of things he says does make sense, and there's a lot of
absolutely, yeah.
And there's a lot of
that's what was so shocking to me. I followed him forever, and he is super on point. So to the point where not too long ago he was on obviously Joe's podcast and was talking about this book. Forget his name, but he died in an aggressive cancer, of course, but. Laurel Canyon and the satanic stuff that was going on in Laurel Canyon and the military intelligence ties to like the Mamas and the Papas and Frank Zappa, et cetera, et cetera. So he was definitely and then he went off onto the flat Earth. I thought he was trolling. I literally thought it was a work because he's known for stuff like that. But no, he believes that.
Well, I feel like it's the one. It's the one topic that, unfortunately, like him putting so much emphasis on it, it kind of discredits everything else he says, and everybody just kind of, and it kind of sucks for everybody like us who are just basically saying like the reason why conspiracies stay alive and the reason why so many people are intrigued with it is because once you look into it, then you realize like. In some cases you might be connecting some dots that are pretty far apart, but in many cases there's a lot of dots there and they're really close. And you might have to make a little bit of a leap to kind of figure out, put the pieces together. But these conspiracies stay alive because there's a lot of evidence of a lot of things, and there's a lot of things that we know historically has happened for sure. Things like I mean, I was just telling Jeff before Pat joined us. I just had Thomas Drake on, and Thomas Drake, NSA whistleblower. What him and Edward Snowden and William Benny and all these guys, what they exposed was something that 10 years ago, 15 years ago would have been considered a conspiracy theory. It's like, oh, you've been reading too much, George Orwell, this idea that the government can listen to everything and see everything you're doing with your webcam and all this stuff. And then, 10, 15 years later, it's like common knowledge now. And that's the thing about a lot of these things. It's like, it seems crazy. I mean, you look at vaccines. I know both of you guys have kids. I've had Del Bigtree on, who did the Vax documentary. I also had John Rappaport on when he was one of the first journalists who was kind of pushing the story and exposing the story of the CDC whistleblower who exposed the link between the MMR vaccine and autism symptoms with it. And, all these things that seem crazy at first, look at fluoride. I mean, if you're talking about fluoride being harmful for you 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, people look at you like, oh, you're just one of those conspiracy theories. And now you realize like they've come out and proven that there's literally no actual dental benefits of it, and it really makes no sense why we've ever used it in any water.
Well, and you go back to the early uses of it in concentration camps to make people passive and docile. And the thing is, bro, a lot of times when you don't even really have to connect the dots. You just have to read. You just have to be aware, and then you come to find out what they've been feeding us is the conspiracy theory, and what we're working with is fact. And then you get into, the whole CIA of weaponizing that term conspiracy theory to make it as pejorative as possible to kind of dismiss you. But, like you just mentioned, if you were the day or two or the week or two after the Gulf of Tonkin said, hey, you know what, this is horseshit. This shit didn't happen. You would have been, only through historical perspective are we able to be vindicated. And unfortunately, it's not about being right because, in the throes of the situation is when I want people to be aware, not 10, 20, 30 years later.
Well, you look at
how fast have we forgotten about the Vegas shooting?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I know. Isn't that scary how something just doesn't make sense, but and everybody kind of agrees it doesn't make sense, and then little by little it just kind of drifts away and we forget about it, and we're just like, there's more to this story, but nobody, they capitalize on the fact that people have short attention spans. And we don't, you look at every 4 years, they sell us the same thing. Every debate's the same thing. It's like, oh, we're for the middle class. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And you can watch. I was just talking to a past guest recently about this. How I've been on down this rabbit hole of like Googling a bunch of debates from like, the early ones with Nixon and JFK to, recent ones, and how they're all just basically the same rhetoric over and over again. And it's like we just fall for it over and
every
over.
time. It's a horrible WWE script is what it is.
Yeah, it is. So let's get into how did you guys meet, and how did why did you guys decide to get into doing a conspiracy podcast?
You want me to jump on that,
Go
Pat?
ahead, Jeff. You can start, and I'll go ahead and add.
Well, yeah, he was kind of the second part to the story. Like you mentioned at first, Ricardo, I have my own show, much more lighthearted, called It's Me Speaking to You. Pat was actually my first guest. I've known Pat for years. We're both from the same hometown. We recently just kind of made each other's like real acquaintance in the last few years, but we've known, had similar circles. On my show, I had a segment called the Conspiracy Triangle of Doom, and it was essentially 3 questions I would ask every single guest, no matter what walk of life. First one was, do you believe in the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence? Second, do you believe the official version of JFK? And third, do you believe the official version of 9/11? And so obviously, that kind of appealed to Pat, and, having him on 4 or 5 times, apparently he liked the cut of my jib, and asked me to do something he had been thinking about for a long time called the Conspiracy Farm. And, of course, took me a minute to realize he was serious and wasn't ribbing me. But and off to the races we've been. You talk about former Navy SEALs, former Russian Spetsnaz, former deputy directors of counterintelligence for the FBI. I mean, the list goes on and on. And
economist
Peter Schiff, Oliver Stone's kid, Sean Stone. Josh, I mean, just so many different stories, and it's crazy because, from episode 1, and again, not to service myself or pat myself on the back or pat on the back, from episode 1, we were breaking this off that so much of this stuff is now mainstream, from individuals like Fethullah Gulen, FBI whistleblower Sibel Edmonds, information on all these different foreign assets in our government, from Turkish spies, Israeli spies, et cetera, human trafficking, organ trafficking. It's just. We've really, we've had the pulse. This has not been some Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot show. And we definitely have a lot more planned. And I can't thank Pat enough, again, for asking me to come along the ride.
It has provided us with a lack of sleep at times, though, doing, when Jeff and I had a long discussion. And when we finally did the show, we did it with Craig Sawman Sawyer, former SEAL Team 6 guy who started the Vets for Child Rescue he's out in Hollywood doing a lot of consulting on action movies, things like that. And he started that Vets for Child Rescue to go after and rescue children who are victims of the sex trafficking trade. And he and I had researched, Jeff and I had researched a lot leading up to that, and also with Sonny Puzikas, who's former Russian Spetsnaz. And I can tell you that researching that subject and finding out how bad it really is and the things that are going on, will lead you to a lack of sleep, but it had, it's something that had to be done. And I had a talk with my running coach, who's an ultra marathon machine, and he changed his life by seeking happiness. And I had a long discussion with him and said, I would love to do a podcast that was 100% totally positive. It would certainly make it easier to sleep at night. But frankly, I think Jeff and I both feel that it's our duty. Somebody's got to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, it's similar to you guys. I'm a parent, but I started this podcast probably 3-4 years ago, and it was kind of just, I was working an unfulfilling job, didn't really feel like I was contributing, and constantly doing research and reading and listening to podcasts, and Rogan's was one of the first ones that I really got obsessed with because I do a lot of commuting for work, and it was just convenient to listen to something thought-provoking while I'm stuck in the car. Why not listen to something that's interesting? And it, and I'm just like, what? Why not start a podcast? Because it's even if one person listens and I kind of spread this information with one person, hopefully they bring up this conversation with somebody they know and then cause a ripple effect, which is why I called it a ripple effect.
Yeah, nice. I will have to say, and this comes with a caveat, because now everybody and their mother has a podcast, and I'm with that. You know what I mean? Yeah. But again, not to go Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, man. I take this show, and I know Pat does, and I know you do too, Ricardo, like very seriously, because what we're up against, again, is so deep and dark and wicked, and it's beyond just a political corruption or are they hiding alien. It's deep and it's dark.
Yeah, I mean, but as parents and as people who kind of try to do both, you try to dive deep in these very dark and I mean, I just had Matthew Valentes on, who was an executive producer of the documentary A Open Secret, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, exposing the Hollywood pedophilia problem. And we talked about the Franklin scandal. We've talked about child trafficking. We talked about all which is, like you said, super depressing. But what's the other option, right? The other option is not talking about it, is not getting this information out there, not, sparking. If the only thing we do to contribute is sparking these conversations and share this information, then at least we're attempting to do something. Where the opposite is, ignorance is bliss, and just going on with your day saying, hey, I can't do anything. And that's, of course, you've lost. The second you assume you can't do anything and you can't change anything, you've already lost. And every
Absolutely.
great change in the world.
Well, and this also comes with a certain presupposition. Can we cuss on this?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
That it comes with a presupposition that people give a shit, quite frankly. Like I say all the time on the show, we unfortunately live in a society where people are willing to trample other human beings for goods, for sales on goods and services. So it's just like, it was almost illustrated recently with the JFK files that came out. Hidden within that was, even though it didn't say a name or point necessarily a finger, it was a corroboration of a shot from the front. Now, that alone just blows it all apart. So then you can start asking questions on who, why, where. But the fact that was publicly put out there and no one batted an eye. Everything kind of went on as usual.
Yeah. I mean, the mainstream media, I read that and went, holy Christ, they hit it with a tracheotomy on him. And, then listening to mainstream media and hear the talking heads go, nothing substantial came out of the JFK files. I thought, are you kidding me?
Yeah. So it's frustrating. It almost feels.
You morons.
Yeah.
The agenda is very clear. For people that are paying attention, and after our, and I'll give you a great example. And Jeffrey and I have talked about this. I belong to a running group, and we were running one morning. It was after our first episode, and a friend of mine in the running group had listened to it, and I had given a description and said, think about what most people are going through each day. They're getting up early, getting their kids ready, feeding them breakfast, getting them off to school, going to work, coming home, picking the kids up, go to practice for whatever sport they're in, if that's what they're doing or whatever it is. They get a couple sound bites off of the news, and that's what they believe. That's all they have time for. They don't research. And, one of the guys that's running with me, when after the first episode, we're running literally the next morning after he heard it, and he goes, I'm that guy, man. I'm that dad. I'm running around, working hard, busy with the kids, doing all this stuff, and I'm that guy, man. So I'm listening to your podcast now and others and trying to educate myself.
Yeah, I've said that on this podcast a bunch of times. With a recent guest, I was talking about how he was saying how he doesn't really have sympathy for people who don't go out and look for the information because it's there and it's easily accessed. But like I said, I'm like, I can see. I work. We have a family-owned little construction company. Being Portuguese, we're in the cement business. Us and Italians apparently always end up in the cement business. But I could easily be caught up in, like, I had kids a little later in life. I'm 32. I have a 1-year-old, a little over a 1-year-old, and an almost 3-year-old. But if I had kids in my early 20s or mid 20s, and I was working a job that wasn't seasonable, I live in Massachusetts, so the winters we slow down quite a bit, and I just kind of take care of paperwork. Right. So that's when I really have time to start researching and doing stuff. But if I was working 40 to 60 hours every week, had 2 kids at a younger age, like, I could easily see myself just being lost, like having no idea what's going on in the world and just having no time or, even more importantly, energy to even do it, even if I was interested in trying to do the research, So in a way, and this is all the way the system is kind of built. Like, it's this idea that we. So you create these unfulfilling lives. You put the other first thing is, like, with us all being parents, like the idea that kids come out of college already in debt, that they're already set for failure, because you're coming out of college, you're with a diploma. Who knows? You probably end up getting a job that has nothing to do with that diploma anyways, and then you end up having all this debt, which means what? You have to work a full-time job. You have to keep some income coming, so you have no flexibility to travel, go find a job maybe that makes you happier or whatnot. So you have to keep making money, and then you keep making money doing doing this thing you probably don't enjoy. And then you buy some shit to kind of deal with the fact that you're kind of empty and unfulfilled. And then when you buy that stuff, you create more debt. So then you have to keep making money. And then it's just like this vicious cycle of just working, buying shit you don't need to make you happy, and then creating more debt, and then working some more, and it's just
this is what Morpheus told us in the Matrix. He held up the battery. That's all we are. We're just ones and zeros. We're just little machines to fuel the machine.
And that's why.
Dude, I just watched that again like 2 weeks ago and went, holy.
Such a great movie. One of the most awesome metaphors for what's going on in the world. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that and are you guys familiar with Network from the late 70s, I believe? You know, Network.
Yeah, I'm as mad as hell.
Exactly, yeah. That was certain movies make more sense today than they did when they came out. You know, it's similar with like we talked about 1984, George Orwell. I mean, that makes as much sense as ever. But yeah, I mean, it's scary because you're and that's why I think martial arts, I think podcasts, I think anything, music, at heart I'm a musician. That's why I started this podcast so easily, because I already had microphones and software and all this stuff. But anything that expands somebody's creative thinking and imagination and all this stuff will help you look at things outside the box. I know during like the hippie era when they were protesting against war and stuff like that, I wonder how much of their ability to see through the propaganda, through the bullshit, was because they were doing these psychedelics, LSD or whatnot, that was helping them kind of, not fall into that trap of just kind of believing everything they heard.
But that takes us into MK Ultra, the CIA program, with all the musicians and the LSD and the teachings of Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda's books that I read. God, I think I was in 8th and 9th grade when I read those, which they've been out forever. And with the MK Ultra CIA program, to basically render a generation of kids almost helpless, and all of them are high, they're into the music, everything else to a certain extent. Yeah, they were obviously demonstrating and stuff, but they were kind of useless besides that, because of all the dope they were on and everything else. And what I think, and I just kind of drew a conclusion of, well, MK Ultra then into the 80s was, the weapons and the crack into the ghettos and everything else, and it just kind of has continued in my mind.
Yeah.
Well, and that was one of our guests, Joe Atwell, we had on, and that was kind of his assertion, basically how they weaponized basically the music through, essentially, like Pat saying, MK Ultra, through certain institutes like the Tavistock Institute, the Beatles, and like the creation of the teenager. He said they wanted to create what he called an archaic revival, where everyone was kind of like, just dressed down, really austere, you know what I mean? So they could not be prepared for the next wave of basically technology, et cetera. But it was an interesting philosophy. I think, Jim Morrison's father being so intricately involved in the Gulf of Tonkin, Frank Zappa's dad, supposedly military intelligence, supposedly the head of the Grateful Dead was the son of the head of the Tavistock Institute. So, I mean, just all these different things. It just makes for interesting conversation. And that's kind of what you talked about and we talked about on the show. We don't necessarily sign on to everything, but, man, sometimes, some of these theories and hypotheses makes from good conversation.
Yeah, well, I'm like you guys. I entertain everything, maybe besides flat Earth, but I entertain everything else because I think, obviously we've all been wrong. We've all at one point thought some things sound so outrageous and so out of the realm of possibility, then eventually like, holy shit, there's some truth to this. So it's like, I don't want to be the last guy to figure out that there's some truth to it. So if it sounds interesting, I'm more than all ears to listen. I've had Dennis McKenna on, and in the conspiracy world, his brother, Terrence McKenna, there's some people who do believe that he was a part of, that, he was CIA and he was a part of, so it's, I've heard both sides of the argument, but I can kind of see the other side of the argument too, that I think that a lot of the psychedelics and a lot of the smoking weed and all that stuff kind of, they were also the anti-war movement, in a lot of cases. So so I wonder, I'm like, well, I don't know if everything fits, if everything kind of makes sense, because they were the ones who were also anti-Vietnam War and anti-war and
I mean, honestly, that doesn't have to be necessarily mutually exclusive. All of it was true. A combination. I mean, you coming out of the 40s and 50s and all of the baby boomers were really, that ilk was just catching on to how horseshit it was. And honestly, and what's so sad and I find so profound, I think that those years, the 60s had a lot of strong people who were speaking truth to power, and you saw what happened to them. Any of those cats who rose up, from Kennedy to RFK to Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, whomever, that the amount of assassinations and repression of any kind of uprising, if you will, was so heavy. You haven't seen anything close to it since. When I lived in Chicago, when the war broke out, it was laughable, the kids that were protesting and the way they were protesting. And I wound up meeting a guy named Bill Ayers, whom a lot of people know was kind of Barack Obama's mentor, if you will. I think he was kind of co-opted by larger purposes, but he basically says, like, you guys know nothing about protest. You know, the way we got down was a whole different story, not just the weathermen, but, you know, people were legitimately pissed and understood how horseshit stuff was, I think, back in the day, regardless if they were on dope or whatever. But they definitely laid the smackdown in the 60s, because you've not seen anything like that since then.
Well, I mean, with the internet, I mean, everybody says if those protesters in the 60s had the internet today, imagine what they could put together. But you have seen revolutions in the Middle East, you know, using social media and stuff. But it is amazing just how much. Again,
an argument to be said there that was even weaponized by external forces.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. There was that documentary on Netflix, Something on Fire, about the Egyptian protests. I remember watching it, and I was all like,
Arab Spring.
Yeah,
pretty much all provocatory.
Yeah, I remember watching it. I was all emotional. I'm like, oh my God, you know, I'm like, that damn government, you know. And then you do your research. It was like soon after I watched it. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, this was all, you know, orchestrated. This was all, you know, funded by Western powers. So, and that's
when you get into Muslim Brotherhood, not to cut you off, but just a simple research of Muslim Brotherhood takes you right back to what we're talking about: Western powers, the radicalization of Wahhabism, going back to your days of Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh
yeah, World War I.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think to understand the Middle East, you have to understand World War I, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, how they carved up the Middle East, and just really it was.
A lot of people sleep on that guy, the Grand Mufti. Look up his role in World War I.
Yeah,
the Grand Mufti.
It's just one of those things where everybody just assumes that. It just, you know, they've just been doing this forever. Look at historically, like Iran in the early 50s, what is 52, 53, when they had the first democratically elected president or prime minister in
Mossadegh.
Yeah, Mossadegh, and then we funded Western powers funded to take him down because he didn't want to renew the oil fields, the lease on them, that's
why I find it so funny today when people talk about U.S. supposed interference and Russian interference in our election. I'm like, do you guys have any clue what's been going on the last 80 years? You know what I mean? Not just interfering in elections, we're bodying leaders. You know, we're killing leaders if they don't roll with it. It's just, come on.
The School of Americas in Georgia. I mean,
exactly.
It's taxpayer money. I mean, it's insane. It's now, Pat, your family. Jeffrey, were you born in America?
Yes, absolutely. Davenport, Rock Island, Illinois, right. But the Quad Cities.
And I think Pat was also born in America, but his parents were from Croatia.
Yeah, well, yeah, my family came from Croatia, from the coal mines and farms of northwest Croatia, west of Zagreb, to the coal mines and farms of southern Iowa. You know, when people arrived here back then on the island, they basically said, all right, what do you do? And people would tell them what they were good at, and they'd go, all right, here's the map, that's where you're going.
Yeah,
you know, and that's where my family went, and they spread out from there. Yeah, but there's still Miletiches in southern Iowa and of course here in eastern Iowa. So, but yeah, it's interesting how they did things back then as opposed to now. Now it's you show up and you just go on welfare many times and Section 8 and things like that. Whereas back then it was, I hope you're good at something because you're going to be working.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask, and I'm sure both of you guys have talked to family members or just guests and friends from overseas. Does it seem like people from overseas they have a better sense of American history, you know, and our interventions, like we were talking about in Iran and Central America and South America, all the coups there, and it seems like they understand American history better than Americans do. And I know people in America always talk about North Korea and how all those people are brainwashed, but I always say that America seems like a mild North Korea because people in America do have this, like they've been brainwashed too to believe that America's only been doing these things for the good of the world and fighting for freedoms and whatnot. And does it seem like people overseas have a better sense and grip?
I mean, when you talk about levels of manipulation and who's being manipulated and engineered, it's 6 one way, half dozen the other. We have our brand over here that they're hip to. And, they have theirs that we're hip to. I mean, they pretty much are run by the EU and BBC. So it's just another version of, we don't even have an EU yet. They're working on a North American Union, but, they have basically state-run media and all that good garbage, just like we have over here. But I think overall, they have a better perspective of us than I think we do.
Well, I would say the bigger overall portion of American populace doesn't. I mean, they can't tell you who the vice president is nowadays. Most Americans, so that's the scary part to me. I think as much as us three at least have delved into, the history of the United States, the real history of it. Certainly we understand what's going on, and it's kind of funny. My daughters, I have to continually. I have a 13-year-old and then a 4-year-old who hasn't been exposed to any of this yet, but. My 15-year-old would come home from high school and my 13-year-old and talk about one of their teachers talking about, whatever subject it is. And I just laugh and roll my eyes and go, okay, here's what's actually going on. And the next time they bring it up, go ahead and educate them on it. Okay. And tell them that this is actually what's going on. When they give the kids an assignment and they have to pay attention to MSNBC and CNN for their information, I go, no, come with me to the computer. We're going to go ahead and you're going to write a paper that's a little different than the rest of the children.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a niece who's 13, and I do the same thing. She'll be like, Uncle Ricky, what she's like, what really happened? Because I always give her some. And what's funny is that the truth is usually much sexier and much more intriguing. And I'm like, if you actually were honest with these kids, there's probably a better chance they'd pay attention. Because I know from my perspective, if they actually told me historically what really happened, then it's much sexier and much juicier. And it was much more likely I'd pay attention because I hated history in school. And then after I left school and I was doing my own research and stuff like that, that's when it really became intriguing because I'm like, oh, shit, that's not how it happened. Oh, I'm like, oh, this was going on. That was going on. All this corruption, all this conspiracy. It's like, why do I need to watch a Denzel movie? I'm like, some of the best suspense thrillers I've ever read were books about real American history or world history. So I kind of feel like the truth is much stranger than fiction, and you start doing some research and you go down some rabbit holes, and that's kind of what I want to get into too. Is how did you guys? I mean, for a lack of a better term, like how did you guys get exposed to looking at things outside the box? What brought you down this rabbit hole of because I think some people have documentaries, and I don't think it's ever just one thing. I've asked past guests and they're like, I don't think it was one thing. And I remember when a guest said that, I kind of looked at my life. I'm like, yeah, they're kind of right. It was that band I was listening to, 1 Minute Silence. It was kind of political. Then I watched that documentary. Then I read that book, and it's like little by little kind of chipped away at my worldview until I'm like, holy shit, like everything I thought I knew, I don't. And did you guys have anything that any specific thing, or maybe a multiple of things that kind of start changing your worldview?
Jeff, you go ahead and go first, and then I'll add.
Well, it's kind of, I don't know if I told you this, Pat, but it was weird. I had an odd revelation not too long ago of where it actually started. I thought it started with just the Kennedy assassination around being 16 or 17, but when I was a kid at Harrison Elementary School, it's kind of weird, man. When I was a kid at Harrison Elementary School, I would go into the library and I would always check out this book. I remember where it was at. I remember what it looked like. And it was called Assassination. And I remember this at second, third grade or whatever, thumbing through this thing and being so, I didn't want to read. I hated reading as a kid, but I would just go to the pictures. And I remember seeing, so many of those pictures from Robert Kennedy and all this stuff. And particularly the Zapruder still shot of Kennedy's, head getting blown up. And so I would always peep that. I would just realize that. I would always watch that and or read that or check it out. And then so later on in life, I remember just I don't know, filtering politics. I remember as a kid hearing about Shiites a lot when Reagan was president. I remember when we bombed Libya. I just had no real context of it. But I remember when I first saw my first Kennedy documentary called Reasonable Doubt. And it just I was hooked, man. It was just the impact for me over everything was, how can the president get killed under like suspicious circumstances? You would think they'd bring out everything to find the killer. And not only was that not true, the level of orchestration that went into assassinating him really just reverberated so heavily in me. And of course, it's systemic throughout so much of geopolitics, et cetera. But for me, started a book called Assassination in grade school.
Yeah. So, for me, I think I was about 6 years old. In 1971, that dates me pretty well, obviously. 5 years old, something like that. I was standing in line in downtown Albia, Iowa, a very tiny, small town in southern Iowa, with my mom and my grandma, and we were standing outside of the Farmers National Bank in 1971 when the farm collapse happened, when Nixon basically took us off the gold standard. I think it was, 71 is when Nixon did that. So it was right around that time when farmers started going belly up. And I was very curious as to what was going on, and that's burned into my brain for the rest of my life. I remember asking what the hell was going on, and they were trying to explain it. And just the fact that there was a line that went, down the street a couple blocks and curved around the corner a couple blocks of all the farmers in that area in southern Iowa trying to get there. There was a rush on banks in all the farm communities everywhere around the Midwest of trying to get their money out. And I think that opened up a can, to be honest with you. And I was so sold on the war efforts and all this other stuff, and I finally, I just started thinking about it, and all the people that I'd been talking to and had trained law enforcement and military for 20 years now, and some of the guys I'd talked to, and some of the guys who were veterans, and they're like, yeah, it's a bunch of shit. I fought for this reason. I thought I was going to do something patriotic, and they actually had researched, and slowly but surely it just kept creeping in on me more and more and more. And then watching the news, I just go, spreading democracy by blowing the shit out of countries. I'm not buying this anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, spreading peace with bombs and weapons. Yeah, that doesn't
love bombs.
Yeah, it's so interesting how people can. I mean, but we've all, I guess, not all of us have been as lucky at being at 5 or 6 or be that young and to be able to kind of look at things from being able to pick up on that, because I think many people as adults are still, I mean, I'm sure you guys talking to your friends and stuff with some of these topics, your first reaction is, or many times, like the first reaction is, no, that's bullshit, or no, that's not true. And it's like, you could tell that a lot of times it's just this defense mechanism where they've been sold something, and when somebody
it's a confirmation bias that they have to defend. I mean, I think we all kind of have it, and I think the part of the conspiracy farm, what we try to do is not be like, I'm right about this. Like we said, have some flexibility in what we're asserting, because things are quite fluid.
Well, I remember your first when Pat was on your show. It's me speaking to you. You asked him those 3 questions, and I know he was kind of on the fence on the 9/11 thing. But so many, like a little bit of time going by and probably doing a little bit more research. Where do you stand on that, Pat? Do you still feel like it's you're on the fence on it, or you feel more comfortable? I don't go too deep into it. I came to, and I don't even remember my answer, but it's probably the exact same as I'm going to tell you now. Without a doubt, we knew that terrorists planned on using airliners as weapons to destroy things. And that's a proven fact. We knew that. How much we knew further than that, to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure. But I'm not, I don't even delve into that, because I think, to be honest with you, there has to be documentation that comes out that's ironclad, that proves that people knew about it, that it was planned, and that sort of stuff. And I haven't even dug into it more than that, and just really don't care to, because there's so many things right now that are going on that I feel are so much more important to educate people on. The current political situation that's going on, and it's hilarious. You can just see the people and I haven't gotten into any debates on Twitter in the past week or two, at least real thick, but you can tell the people that come on to try and defend the globalist stance and the mainstream media stance, that I just sit there and I go, look,
you're either a paid shill or you're a complete moron. It's just the way it is. There's just no in between. You're either being paid to do this, to just troll on Twitter and Facebook, or you're just an absolute moron.
So what topics, is there certain subjects or topics that really are dear to your heart or you guys are really passionate about? Any specific topics, like you were saying, Pat, there's things that are more important now that you feel like should be information that really we should be focusing on? What are those subjects and topics you think that really we should be focused on and help spread that information?
Well, I think it's encompassed, to be honest with you, in the nationalist versus globalist stance. And all things globalist are all about control, all about socialist power, all about basically controlling America, controlling our policies, taking away our sovereignty. If they could, they would have already had, our country being run by a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels. They just don't care. Our politicians are bought, and everybody is, that's a very general statement. But it's more so now than ever before. I mean, you see politicians making decisions and voting certain ways on stuff that just makes no sense to anyone with one eye and half a brain, and you just go, they've been bought. And, nobody knew how deep, I don't think Trump even knew how deep the swamp was. Maybe he did, but the way things are going right now with, I tell people, pay attention to Q. Jeff just sent me more info on it today. After I had sent him some initial stuff that I had seen. I'm paying attention to that guy big time. I'm chomping at the bit for the indictments. There's supposedly thousands of indictments right now. They're supposed to be unopened, unsealed, I think, before Christmas. The mass number of pedophiles and child pornography rings and all the other stuff that have been scooped up since Trump's been president. The rat lines with the weapons, the organs, the children. It's so corrupt and so diabolical that I'm really. It kind of drives me nuts that it hasn't happened. And I think Trump is such a good chess player. I think that he is allowing people. He's allowing the left to think that they're winning, that they're building this huge case to impeach him. And you can just see it on the media growing all the time. And I think a bomb gets dropped here pretty soon, and it's going to be crazy. I think that the military will be needed. I think that the National Guard is going to be needed when these people start getting scooped up. I think that the streets are going to be pandemonium because people are not going to be able to comprehend what's going on.
Jeff, do you want to add?
The question was what? Any particular subjects? That we're passionate about?
Yeah, that you really. Yeah.
I not to disagree with Pat. Because obviously, he cares about 9/11. I look at it more as not that you need. For me, it's kind of a no-brainer. This was something that was written about in the Project for a New American Century. They were looking for a new type of Pearl Harbor type event. That event opened the floodgates for the last 15, 20 years in this perpetual war that we now know as the War on Terror. Kids have been raised on it. Kids now, when it happened, are now almost 20 years old. This is indoctrinated in our brain as far as this war, us kind of versus them, and then the psychological impact of that day that we can just play back every year now. Plane hitting one building, that's almost one attack in itself. Plane hitting two buildings, attacking in itself. A plane going down somewhere, a plane hitting, you talk about, and then the collapse of the building. We were so fucking traumatized that day, dude. It's, we were like, I was like, even though I knew something was up, I was like, I don't give a fuck, kill somebody. That's the psychological impact on all of us was so absolutely devastating that it allowed this open checkbook, this blank checkbook to be written for the next however many years on the War on Terror. And so I think all of my kind of passions encompass everything that's involved in that. Everything Pat just said, the harvesting of bodies, the abduction of people, the globalist kind of expanse that's now moving into, AI and cryptocurrency and blockchain. There was so much to this. And it's like I said, it's really hard to pin down one particular passion, but I think, not to get too esoteric, I think there's also a spiritual war going on that's allowing this to happen. It's kind of a good versus evil, I think, that's taking place. And we talk about doing this show and the impact of these shows and stuff. And one question I have, not just you, but everybody, it's a choice. It's a choice in to give a fuck or to not give a fuck, quite frankly. You know what I mean? We talk about where we get our information, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people do their information, like Pat said, like fast food. We go to Burger King and satiate ourselves and we feel that we're full when in fact there's no nutrients in that at all. And that's the same way we get our information. We need to care more. People need to have their red pill moment, whatever it is, because literally we can't fuck with any solution unless we recognize the depth of the problem. And I'm not a huge Trump stumper, but if he's doing what he's saying he's going to do, almost 8,000 sealed indictments, et cetera, this will be unprecedented. And this will absolutely change hopefully the fabric of our society. Once we start getting wise to like, dude, you guys, they're trading in people, in guns, in arms, in drugs, and body parts. And I mean, if they get a clue to the depths of the darkness, that's what I'm trying to do, man. Shine the light on any of these subjects. Sorry to ramble, but it's a larger
thing that, Craig Sawyer, when we had him on SEAL Team 6, he kept reiterating that we have to shine a light on this stuff. Just the subject of child sex trafficking, just that alone, it was more about just exposing these people. And that's the thing. We have to expose these globalists for everything that they truly want to do. I know it's so hard for so many people to comprehend that people could be this diabolical and evil because we don't think that way. But we have to start thinking that way in terms of how to cut these people off at the pass. How does a detective, a homicide detective, track down a killer? Well, he has to think like a killer, and so we, the people on this side, have to start thinking like the people on the other side to be able to figure these people out and stop them.
Yeah, I mean, look at what happened in Haiti with the woman linked to the Clinton Foundation and the child trafficking. You look at Dennis Hastert, Speaker of the House. This stuff isn't.
Oh, the mayor of Seattle, who had to resign because he raped his own nephew, and other kids. Did you ever see that one time? The mayor of Seattle, one of the major cities of our country, had to resign because he raped his own nephew when he was a child.
Well, I mean, if you go back to what Ricky was saying. Ricky was saying a bit ago, the Franklin report, this documentary and this on this report, how indoctrinated or how woven into the fabric of society this was. Like Johnny Gosch taken to this place in Colorado. Somebody calls the head pimp or whatever, hey, I need him, and they just ship off kids based off of, they put them in magazines, they flip through the ones they want. And this is basically the Sandusky shit that went on in Penn State. This is just scratching the surface. Penn State wasn't the only place where they were rounding up kids for boosters. This was fucking, everywhere in your city halls and you're everywhere, so it's hard to believe, like Pat said. No one wants to think that it is that wicked, but it is. And that kind of like naivete is what allows people to allow killers to smile in their face and ask for their vote, etc. Like you said earlier, that every 4 years they run this game on everyone. It's a really elaborate, sophisticated WWE program.
Yeah,
and that's why I'm saying, we've been trying to keep up with this stuff, and as we've delved deeper and deeper into what they call the deep state, the swamp, and it was something that we've been looking at even before Trump was elected. Think of the millions of people. I mean, how rare are we to be able to keep up with this stuff? What percentage of Americans do you think even know about this stuff? It's such a small percentage of people that know about it who have actually researched it, that imagine the rest of the brains in America. The rest of the people's brains in America absolutely frying when all of this stuff comes out. If those sealed indictments actually are true, are real, factual, which I pray to God they are, and I'm leaning towards they absolutely are. When those sealed indictments are opened, when people start getting scooped up, how do you, as a mainstream news organization, report the thousands of names and big names, judges, politicians, actors, actresses, all these types of people that are implicated in this stuff? When they get scooped up, how do you even remotely have the country not go completely upside down?
Well, I guess the fear is just like the Vegas shooting and a lot of other events, that people are surprised, they're startled, and then they go back to their everyday lives. That's what I worry about, because it almost seems like
we say it on the show all the time. We are a nation and a society with Stockholm syndrome. Exactly what you just said. We allow our abusers to continue abusing us and ask for seconds. And that's why I say, what's the moment? Where's the line for everyone? I know in our personal lives, we like to think we're tough. Somebody hits me, I'll whoop their ass, or whatever it is. Everyone has their kind of personal line in their own space. But, from a larger perspective, when you realize the depth of how you've been played, at least admit you've been played, and, like I said, find some level of action, whether it's a podcast, run for office, whatever. But I mean, this is crazy. And I hope something comes of these 9,000, 8,000 indictments, et cetera, because it gets frustrating, man. I'm sorry if I get worked up, because this shit is crazy. This shit is really, really crazy. And the frustration is the people who, like Pat, there are legitimately halfway smart people who are just ridiculously brainwashed and will never even admit they're brainwashed. I have loved ones about Trump. They hate Trump. I'm like, okay, you hate somebody who, Trump's easily hateable. He's kind of a dick. He has his way that you could easily hate him. Whereas Barack Obama, for 8 years, played everyone with his smooth, big-eared, Barry fucking used cars salesman horse shit, and started illegal wars, Syrian refugee, all that shit, and funding ISIS and drugs. And he facilitated a whole shitload of this as the president. But they loved him. That's why it's just like people's filter just has to get a little retweaked, because, like I said, some Stockholm shit syndrome is seriously going down, which creates a level of apathy that allows this stuff to just pervade like nobody's business.
Well, I've had Roger Stone on twice, one to talk about his JFK book, and the other one to talk about his Clinton book. And it's funny because immediately people, just because, I'm sharing articles on Clinton's history or whatnot, people immediately say, oh, you're a Trump lover. It's funny because it's like when you don't necessarily have to like or dislike another side. If I'm sharing some important information, I'm just sharing that important information because I think it's important. It's not because I'm bashing the Clintons because I like Trump, or I'm bashing Trump because I like the Clintons. It's just because this is important information. And I think a lot of people who voted for Trump were just people who didn't like Hillary. And but the thing that scares me about Trump is, he talked about draining the swamp. He has Goldman Sachs people working for him. I mean, you look at all the major corporations that he has working in the White House, heads of major corporations. Right. And I think it makes you wonder, because
they're, like I said on the show, they're all gangsters. We had, one side was Barzini, one was Tattaglia, one was Sollozzo, one wants to do numbers, one wants to stay with hookers and do drugs. I mean, it's just a, pick your shade of gangster, quite frankly. But I'm like to think we have a Vito Corleone in office that just wants to do numbers and, just some simple shit, as opposed to, the level of gangsterism that some of them got into. But, they're all gangsters. So, like, pick your poison. But, I
think that's
I just follow a different mindset with Trump, where everything that he's done has been so strategically planned. And from the research that I've done of setting traps for these, he'll send out a tweet, people will freak out, lose their minds, mainstream media will lose their minds, and then next thing you know, one of the mainstream media folks is falling. And then he'll send something else out, the whole, Obama spied on me. And everybody's like, yeah, you're a moron, dude, whatever. Yeah, and it ends up coming true. So, he's a lot more strategic and a lot smarter than people get. He graduated first in his class from most prestigious business school in America. So the guy is no dummy. Guys are probably as smart as they come. Right. So he surrounded himself, yes, with some people from Goldman Sachs and some other places. But I think he's a guy that's smart enough to know to surround yourself with some key strategic people. Bannon and Dr. Gorka left the administration to go out because basically they've said it clear as day that they can do more damage to the deep state from outside, which I think they can and have been. And also, he believes in keep your enemies close, right? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I think that he's smart enough to realize that. And I just think he's setting some major traps. His tweets, Q pointed it out. His tweet about the Republicans are going to have a chance at that seat again very soon, where QAnon is basically saying, look, we set this trap. There was an order given, and he nominated Sessions for a reason, because he knew there'd be a special election, and they set the trap. They got all the investigative people they needed and the eyes on that election to set up the trap, because they knew the whole Democratic Party was going to get involved, and all the voter fraud and everything else was going to be going on. And I mean, Q said it before.
Supposedly there's Soros fingerprints on that one.
Yeah, they want Soros to go down. They know what he's been up to. Obviously, look, if we know what he's been up to, obviously Trump knows what he's been up to. But they want to bring a lot of people down with this one.
Now, in regards to diet, nutrition, your kids, knowing so much about big pharma, the food industry, all this stuff, how has it affected your personal lives? I mean, you're just the way what you eat, how you I mean, from Pat's perspective, a lot of, I was into the weightlifting, pretty intensively in my teens and early 20s, and I was getting the leanest cut of meat, and I was, eating egg whites, and now I look back and I'm like, holy shit, I was a fucking idiot. Like, all that information was wrong, and now I'm very keto-ish type of diet where I'm doing high fat and cholesterol and all that stuff, which has been awesome for inflammation with my joints and all that stuff. How
right.
I mean, it's funny that even something like food, that's a thing. Like, we talk about foreign policy and history and stuff that's going on in the political realm, but money and corruption is everywhere, even in what we're being sold on what we should be eating and what.
Oh yeah, the Food and Drug Administration and the interchangeable jobs within large pharmaceutical companies and food companies, everything else. Yeah, it's obvious. I'm married to a doctor of chiropractic. So, when we were going to have our first daughter 15 years ago, over 15 years ago, I said, we're going to get our kids vaccinated, right? And she goes, not even going to talk to you. Not even going to talk to you. You go ahead and go and do some research, start reading, and you tell me after you've studied it sufficiently, come back to me and we'll talk. And, I was raised by a mom who was a nursing director for many, many years. And, I got vaccinated. I think probably both of you guys ended up getting vaccinated, unless somebody was way ahead of their time as your parents. But so I did the research and went, by the time I got done, I walked to my wife and said, yeah, we're not vaccinating our kids. There is no way in hell they're injecting our kids with this stuff. And she goes, good, because I didn't want to argue with you. So, that alone. And then the food, my health was deteriorating fast. My body had been being destroyed by a gluten intolerance for well over a decade. I mean, I had arthritis so bad that I was getting crippled. I'd run 3 miles and then be crippled for 3 days. And a buddy of mine did blood tests on me, and I stopped eating gluten, processed foods, and went from running 3 miles. I was training for an event called the Leadville 100 with some guys who had already done it and completed it. And working out with those guys, running stadium stairs, doing all kinds of crazy stuff because you're going up mountains in Leadville. I literally went from running 3 miles and being crippled for a couple days to, after I figured out the gluten intolerance, stopped eating gluten immediately because the guy told me, he goes, you're so bad you're going to be dead in 3 years from a heart attack. There's so much inflammation in your body that you're done. You're done. So I stopped eating it, and in 10 months I went from running 3 miles to my longest run of 75 miles. And that was in 10 months. And then went from 230 down to, I think, 182 pounds.
Wow.
So that's something that I learned a lot about. I thought I knew about just, even during my professional fighting career. I thought I was eating healthy. And for the most part, when I was in camp, I was. I mean, I was eating, broccolis and spinach and, the egg whites, of course, and all that sort of stuff for protein. But, I'm getting now closer and closer to where I just want to eat fruits and vegetables and not eat meat at all. I did that just this last weekend and part of last week. And I tell you what, I felt great. And so, like, tonight for dinner, I'm having avocados, true wild rice, and beans and some greens. That'll be my dinner tonight.
And you, Jeff, has some of this information impacted, just you as a parent and your personal diet, because obviously, like I said, we all know that corruption doesn't stop just in politics. It's everywhere. And has it affected, just your perspective on doctors, vaccines, the food you buy, any of that stuff?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but the crazy thing is, I've, for years, and, Jeffrey will tell you the same thing, we've been keen to the pharmaceutical industry and doctors. Doctors prescribe pain medications, like their Cheerios. All the drugs out there that doctors prescribe generally deal with the symptoms and not the cause,
Exactly.
and the I just got asked to sit on a board here in the Quad Cities for the opiate crisis and the heroin crisis. And, listening to these people in this meeting, I had to speak up finally because there were medical professionals and a lot of other people. And there was a guy who runs a big rehab clinic here in the Quad Cities that is in a monastery where monks used to live, but it's a nice rehab facility. And he was kind of quiet, and we were just keeping our mouths shut. And the reoccurring point that was being made was, if your name's not on the pharmaceutical bottle, don't eat it, right? Because it's dangerous. It's bad for you because your name's not on it. Only because your name's not on it. Don't eat somebody else's dope, because it's only bad for you, right? And I stopped, after 40 minutes of this meeting, and I go, look, can I point out the invisible 800-pound gorilla that nobody's mentioning is that basically this stuff is poison and doctors are prescribing it? And then all the medical professionals were like, whoa, wait a minute. We need to be kind of careful about how we go about this. And I go, wait, are we in a war for people's lives? There's 70,000 people dying a year from this. And you're telling me to be careful how I word it? Are you for real? This is a derivative of heroin. And let's not bullshit here. And then finally, other people, a chiropractor spoke up, and then the guy that runs the clinic, the rehab clinic, goes, I want doctors here the next time because they need to be held accountable. And then people started going, oh shit, this is we're the people that are bucking the system. But that's what needs to be done. That's what needs to be said to these people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think functional medicine is starting to become a little more popular. For a while, it was kind of considered like pseudoscience. And yeah, and that's a common theme too with chiropractors. I've met quite a few chiropractors, and they're much more open-minded with just natural remedies. And I've been like that. I've been very lucky that at a young age I became really good friends with a guy, Bob, who owns a supplement store, and he was big into vitamins and stuff like that. And he was basically my doctor on call. Anytime I had a medical issue, I'd call him up and be like, hey, what vitamin or herb can help? And knock on wood, I've been very lucky. And I have a buddy who makes kombucha, who I get kombucha from, and so I try to do my best to take. But I'm very anti-doctors because, like you said, you don't actually get to the root cause of the issue. You're just putting a Band-Aid over symptoms. And Chris Kresser, who's been on the Drogan podcast before, and he's a very interesting guy to listen to. He has a podcast. He's been on Rob Wolf's podcast. Really smart. He had this metaphor that describes today's medical industry. And he's like, today's medical industry is like you having foot pain because you have a rock in your shoe, and the doctor giving you a painkiller instead of telling you to take off the shoe or take off the shoe and get rid of the rock. And that's exactly how they handle it. It's always just, what's the symptom? Let's take care of the symptom.
That's funny. That's funny the way you put that, because that was explained to me the first chiropractor that I was going to, but he was much harsher with me. And it's the same way he explained it, but he goes, so when you're walking down the street with a rock in your shoe, he goes, do you walk into the 7-Eleven to buy some Motrin? Or do you take your shoe off and take the rock out of your shoe? And I go, well, you take the rock out of your shoe? He goes, absolutely, yeah. He goes, you're an idiot. He goes, come see me on a regular basis and quit eating Motrin like Cheerios to mask the pain. He goes, come get it fixed. So he kind of chastised me.
Yeah, and there's people like Max Gerson and a lot of people who've been using food as medicine for a long time. And I've had Dr. Brzezinski on, who's who's kind of controversial because he's had a historic battle with the FDA because he's been curing cancer since the late 80s, early 90s. But anything that's against the grain, anything that's different, anything that can't just give you a drug and make money off it, then, you see now with the whole debate with Kratom, which some people are using for painkillers, for antidepressant, for anxiety, all this stuff, and it's a natural herb. And because the FDA doesn't understand it or know why it's getting popular, they're kind of taking it and having the same perspective that they had on weed, and that's like, oh, well, we don't care that it's helping people, we're just going to make it illegal because we don't have any research to prove that it's not unsafe. And it's like, well, people can go out and buy a handle of vodka and kill themselves. People can go out and buy cigarettes or whatever. So it's like, how do we pick and choose what things we can and cannot do? It's like, oh, I get it. The things you can make money off, those are the things we can kill ourselves with. The things that you can't make money money off. Something as easy as to grow it like weed, then that is what we should put restrictions on. Not something. And it's sad, as not to bring up being parents again, but like I remember when I was watching documentaries where you see these kids who are having seizures and they live in states like New Jersey, and which they can't get medical marijuana or hemp oil or whatever, and these guys have to take these handful of painkillers, or not painkillers, prescription drugs, and they're not any better. They're getting all these side effects from these drugs, and yet
Right.
this natural plant that can help this kid's quality of life is just completely illegal to buy or purchase or use, and people are suffering all because of this primitive fucking law that stuck around for way too long.
Well, I use CBD oils, and I sell CBD oils. They've helped a lot. My running coach, who is a guy who, think of this, he ran 10 ultra marathons, 100 miles or greater. He's done Badwater, 135 miles through Death Valley in 131-degree heat, up into the mountains, 10,000 feet. He's run Leadville 7. He's finished Leadville 7 times. He ran across the United States in I don't know how many weeks, but the guy he's a freak. David Clark's his name. He's got a great book called Out There, Ultra Recovery. It's an amazing book, how he changed his life. But, he ran 188 miles on a treadmill in 48 hours. And his body had fallen apart. His girdle, his pelvic area, the tendons and ligaments and everything were kind of coming apart on him. And he thought that his running career was completely over. And I turned him on to the CBD oils, and he started taking a couple different kinds, a tincture and some what's called nano drops. And now he's back to running like a madman, and he's getting ready to do the hardest ultra marathon probably in the world, coming up here in late March down in Tennessee. So, this is serious stuff. And the NFL just now making it legal for the players to use the CBD oils instead of the friggin' Oxycontins. I know tons of guys, fighters, football players, guys who got addicted to that stuff, and some of them didn't make it out of it. It ruined their lives completely.
What's the name of your CBD oil?
I sell a product from a company called My Club 8, and it's people can contact me on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and I can hook them up with it. But it's perfectly legal. It's 100% organic hemp. It's just the CBD. It doesn't have the THC in it. So it's you get all the benefits medically, and you don't get high. So, some people, like with the Parkinson's and some other serious things like the seizures and stuff, it does help that. But I think that some of the people get more of a benefit from the THC style along with the CBD. I'm not 100% sure on that because, I've not given it to somebody with severe Parkinson's, but it certainly helps. Certainly helps with inflammation within the body. It is the superfood. They say it is so compatible with the human body and our molecular structure that it literally is the best thing we can put in our body.
Oh yeah, it's basically, it's a magical plant. It seems like it's from like a different planet, just how many uses you can get out of it with medicine, with
right.
The fenders on Henry Ford's car, from the first American flag was made out of hemp, and it just
during World War II, all the ropes on the ships, all the clothing, the sailors and army and everybody wore was made of hemp plant. It's great for biodiesel, for running diesel trucks. It's an amazing plant, and the thing is, when we're growing it, it replenishes. So what we're growing now with corn and beans and everything here in the Midwest, it has depleted the soil. All the minerals are gone out of our soil.
Yep.
Where if we were growing hemp, it would actually be replenishing it. And there's a big war on it, and there has been for many, many years. The corn and soybean lobby certainly don't want it to take over.
Yeah. Now, let's wake up Jeffrey. And
I'm here, baby. I'm here.
Hey, you have any? How has your diet or any in that realm of conspiracies with big pharma and big food, has that information that you've learned throughout the years affected your lifestyle and your health?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's just kind of the writing on the wall if you're paying attention. Allopathic medicine is putting a lot of more people in the ground, unless you have an emergency trauma situation. But I think the kind of the more naturopathic, let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. Very familiar with the Gershwin method or diet, whatever that is. I mean, you have people who are eating a more whole plant food diet who are getting off certain medicines. You are having cancers reversed. Again, am I perfect? I try to be very conscious about what I put in my body, especially, just generally speaking. The organic stamp anymore, that's getting politicized. That percentage of stuff you can put in without being organic is growing more and more, and that's being paid for. But overall, I try to, be very conscious about what I put in my body as well as my children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really important because I think health and food, it's one of those things where it's not as sexy as like geopolitics and wars and what's going on in Syria and Yemen and Saudi Arabia and all this stuff. But it's important because the people listening, like this is information that can affect their lives today and can affect your cognitive function, can affect your ability to have energy for your kids and live long. And I mean, I tell people as often as I can, like, don't let prescription drugs be your first resort, which we've kind of created a culture where it is, but let it be your last resort.
Absolutely.
When you have when you've exhausted all the other options, then maybe, entertain the idea of it. But the thing about a lot of the doctors today is that the information's so old too. I mean, they've learned some stuff in the university. By the time that stuff is taught to doctors and doctors are recommending it to you. I mean, if you go to a doctor today, they still tell you to go on the typical low-fat, low-cholesterol diet, which they've been telling us for years, and they completely ignore all the research that proves that dietary cholesterol has almost zero effect on your cholesterol levels. And that was all pushed by the sugar industry. There's a great documentary called Sugar Coated.
That.
Yeah, that's a great documentary. And The Perfect Human Diet. There's a with CJ Hunt. That's another great documentary that really goes into what we should be eating and it just.
Well, again, I think it comes down. I'm sorry, man. I gotta run and get my kids. I know Pat does too. It all comes down to a choice, man. Whether it's food that we're ingesting for nourishment or information we're putting into our brain for intellectual nourishment, it's about a choice, man. You got to start making better choices as far as what we allow ourselves to ingest.
Oh. And just real quick, I'll add this: the PLU number codes on organic, they call it organic produce. When you're in the organic section, it's a 4-digit code that just it'll say PLU and then the number asterisk or whatever, and then a 4-digit code. If it starts with a 3, 4, or 5, basically it is not. It's conventionally grown, which means herbicides, pesticides, things like that. If it starts with an 8, that means it was genetically modified. And if it starts with a 9, the PLU code that starts with a 9 is the only one that's truly organic. So people need to understand that.
Oh, wow. That's great advice. Yeah. Awesome. Well,
yeah, PLU code that starts with 9 is the only one you want to put in your body.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I love getting little tips like that because that really is useful. Well, thanks, guys. I'll hopefully have you on again because I know you guys are big MMA fans. We spent almost the whole show talking about, obviously, a lot of conspiracy and stuff like that. But we got to talk a little bit about I'm going to have some friends that are going to fucking kill me because they're like, all you guys talked about were conspiracies.
Yeah. I just had on Michael Chavello, Pat's former broadcast mate, on my show. It's me speaking to you. You can check that out. It's me, SPK, and the number 2, the letter U, and check us out, The Conspiracy Farm. Right now, our most accessible medium is YouTube. So go check us out there, man. We've been bringing the pain, and we'll continue to do so. And dude, thank you so much for having us on, and I would love to come back on.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate your time. Keep up the great work. I think we're all a part of causing this little bit of ripple, and we're all a part of really, I think, opening eyes and changing people's perspectives and really, getting this information out there, which I think we're all very passionate about. So thanks again, guys. We all have families and wives that are going to kill us if we don't get to where we need to go. So thanks again, and we'll talk again soon. I'll put links to all your stuff. Hopefully get the link to your hemp oil too, because that's really interesting. And I'll get all the links to your shows and everything and put in the show notes so people can get to it easily.
Respect, my man. Respect.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time. Day. And have a great day, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you. Take care. Bye.